What's up guys, Asian here again with another theory crafting video, and today we're going to be comparing two daggers versus a dagger and axe for stamina DPS. This video is specifically looking at the stamina decay, so your result may vary depending on the specific stamina DPS you are running, but in general these findings should be able to apply across the board across all the classes. Just because we're only really going to be looking at whether the extra crit chance from the dagger outweighs the bleed proc chance on the axes. So really quickly going over axes and daggers for dual wield. The final passive ability under the dual wield line is twin blade and blunt, and while you're dual wielding a weapon, which type of weapon you wield gives you a different effect. Axes have a chance to give you a bleed effect. Maces ignore 10% of an enemy's physical resistance after all other resistance debuffs are removed. Swords increase your damage by 2.5%, and a dagger increases your crit chance by 10%. So this is for each weapon you wield. So as you can see here, each axe gives your melee attacks an 8% chance to bleed enemies for 12,099 physical damage over 6 seconds. Each axe that you wield has a chance to proc that. These obviously don't stack, so if you have two axes and they proc one after another, then it just renews the bleed. It doesn't actually you don't have two bleeds. And the same thing with mace, sword, and dagger. So if you have two maces, you're ignoring 20% of your enemy's physical resistance. Dual wielding swords increases your damage done by 5%, and dual wielding daggers give you a 20% crit chance increase. So why does this matter? So the question is, does the 10% extra crit chance that you get from a dagger outweigh the bleed damage that you get from an axe? Now, the axe bleed is a proc, and it is a fairly low chance of procking. It's only 8%. To give you guys an idea of how low that proc chance is, Veladreth has a 20% chance to proc. Sunderflame procs on all heavy attacks, so you pretty much have 100% uptime on Sunderflame. Bloodspawn has a 6% chance to proc, if you kind of want to compare that. So it's a fairly low proc chance. If you ever play a tank and you think about how often Bloodspawn procs, your chances of the axe bleed proccing is just a little bit higher than that, only about 33% higher than that. So it's not gonna be very high. So the question is, does the DPS that the axe bleed provide outweigh the 10% extra crit chance? So that's what we're gonna find out today. So quickly going over the abilities that I'm using. I'm going to be using two pieces of Veladreth, one heavy and one medium. This is a copy of my live tune carried over to the PTS, and so I prefer having 6 medium, 1 heavy for that extra health. It's also very useful because the guild that I'm currently running in, we're doing a progression run on Vet Asylum, so having that extra health really does help you out, especially as a melee character against St. Olms. We're going with 5-piece Thunderflame. We're not really going to be playing around with Twice Fang Snake. This is really going to be in a trial scenario with trial gear, so we're sticking with Thunderflame for these tests. Then we're going with 5-piece Vicious Ophidian. All of my jewelry have weapon damage enchants. We have a sharpened Maelstrom bow in the back bar. We will be using double Ravage Health Poisons on the bow. And then for our daggers, we're going with Infused and Precise Infused on the main hand with a poison damage enchant, and Precise on the offhand with a weapon damage enchant. So that's what we're going to be going with. So the only thing that's going to be changing is that we're going to be swapping this dagger out, the main hand dagger out, for a Infused Axe of the Vicious Ophidian. And then we're going to compare our two parses and see which one ends up pulling higher. So do keep in mind that this is only one data point for each scenario here, so we're not really going to necessarily be seeing the full picture here. Like always, one data point does not a trend make, so we need to collect a lot more data points in order to get a much more robust picture of what's going on here. But at least with this data point, with these two data points, we can at least start to get an idea of what's happening. And particularly important for me is to see just how much DPS does that axe bleed actually provide to our overall DPS. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. I am using the Warrior Mundus, and I am using my raid CPs. So I only have 19 points into piercing, 61 dome, 61 precise strikes, 49 mighty, 40 into master at arms. So this is basically my raid CP, my raid setup. This is what I would bring to raids. So this is not optimized. I am not using the lever. I'm not dumping points into piercing. I'm not using twice fanged. So as the key point here is that as long as everything else remains the same and the only variable we're changing is the dagger and the axe, it should make for a one-to-one comparison. So let's go ahead and get started with the parses here. So there we go. That is the dagger parse. We'll wait to compare parses at the end. Look at our combat metrics report at the end there. Now we're going to go ahead and swap out our dagger for an axe. Exact same thing, it's still infused with the poison damage enchant, so everything pretty much remains the same across the board. So we're not really changing anything at all. The only thing we're changing is that dagger for an axe. So we're going to go ahead and wait for our stamina to get right back up to 100%, or close enough. And we're going to do another parse. So there we go, that is the axe parse. Unfortunately, the way I have these target skeletons set up, I have to move this one over so my caltrops doesn't damage it. Alright, so let's take a look at our combat metrics parse. So let's take a look. This is the axe one first. Gonna have to highlight this since we did manage to hit the other target skeleton. 37.3. here. You can see there. Alright, and for our daggers, 37.3. So there's really not that big of a difference here. If we take a look, it's only a 40, not even 40, 30 DPS difference. That's pretty much within margin of error there. If you're pulling about the same DPS, there's going to be pretty much only even the smallest change can affect your DPS. Just one missed light weave on the back bar, for instance, on your bow bar can change things because you're missing a stack of Hawkeye or something. But let's see how much does the axe bleed count for in terms of our DPS. Let's see if we can find it here. Ah, here it is. It'd be under Twin Blade and Blunt. So, see here, it's only contributing about 1,000 DPS or so. We got 12 procs, 6 of those. Yeah, so let's see. Yeah, so that's the only thing that that could be the axe bleed there. So we got 12 procs. 6 of them were crits in terms of bleeds. Yeah, this ends up being 50%. That's kind of low. So it only added about 1k DPS. So that's how much it's doing. For comparison, we used 1 standard of might, and that did about the same amount of DPS. So it looks like the axe bleed itself doesn't actually contribute that much to DPS. It only contributes 2.7% compared to everything else here, which adds up to be quite a lot. Your heavy attacks did a combined 13% of our DPS. Hell, I mean, even the poisons did more, or at least one of the poisons did more DPS. So the axe bleed itself doesn't seem to be particularly strong. And going back to the Dagger parse here. Let's see. Okay, yeah, so we can see here the amount of damage that was crits went up by 3%. We're looking at about 2.2 million compared to 2.08 million. Got 60% of our hits were crits compared to 56%. So overall, it seems like there's not that big of a difference between using 2 daggers and an axe and a dagger. Like I said earlier, this is only 1 data point for each column. If you can think of it as a spreadsheet, you have dagger, axe dagger. We only have one cell filled out, so we don't really have enough data points to say anything about a trend here. But from what I can tell, it doesn't really seem to matter whether you're using axe dagger or double daggers. They both seem to pull about the same DPS. And ultimately, mastering your rotation is going to be a lot more important than your gear ever will be. So that's something to keep in mind. So that's it for this video. Hope you found it informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.